Okay, welcome everybody to our webinar hosted by the Waldorf School of Baltimore. I'm Lyda Lawrence. I'm the Forest Kindergarten teacher in our children's garden. And we are here tonight with Chinyulu Coons. This is going to be a wonderful program that she's prepared. As questions come up for you, please put them into the chat, and we will be coming back to those during the Q&A session at the end of the program. And thank you to our ASL interpreter, Kathy McMillan, who is an author, ASL interpreter, and Waldorf School of Baltimore board member. She's also a past parent. Thank you, Kathy. Chinyulu Coons was born and raised in Enugu, Nigeria, West Africa, and has been involved in Waldorf education for over 28 years as a mother and early childhood educator. Chinyulu holds a bachelor's in interior design and a master's in architecture. In addition, she's completed the Waldorf Early Childhood Teacher Training at Sunbridge Institute in Spring Valley, New York, and the Lifeways Early Childhood Training. In September 2019, Chinyulu founded We Nurture, a podcast series that I hope you've had a chance to listen to, which offers topics on early childhood, as well as wonderful stories for children. On her website, wenurturecollective.com, she offers online courses, articles, and recipes. In September 2020, Chinyulu became a board member of Lifeways North America. She had recently retired from teaching at the Kimberton Waldorf School. And Chinyulu tells us, quote, Waldorf education has positively impacted my life and offers me immense guidance in my personal life as a mother and educator. Welcome, Chinyulu. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Lyda. Thank you for that introduction. And I'm so excited to be here this evening. And I really want to thank the Waldorf School of Baltimore for inviting me to give this talk. And creating a more wholesome holiday season is a topic that's very near and dear to my heart. And so I'm excited to share, to be able to, explore and share with you, what I have discovered during my years as a parent, especially when my children were young, and also as a Waldorf preschool teacher. So I do have a presentation that I created to help just bring this talk along and to help guide the conversation. And so I'm going to share my screen and get started with the presentation. And before I do start, I also want to really give thanks to Scotty for all her assistance and her help and in just setting this evening conversation, this evening talk. And yeah, thank you, Scotty. Yeah, so much.
It's a pleasure. We're so thrilled to have you. Thank you.
Thank you. So I will first share my screen and then I'll get started. Yes, so tonight's talk, Ushering in a More Wholesome Holiday Season. And as I mentioned, this is just very near and dear to my heart. And so when thinking about the question of the questions, the more than one in tonight's topic, essentially what I came down to was in my thinking was, what does it take to experience a more holistic holiday season? And what I kept coming back to was, what steps can we take to strive for a more holistic lifestyle? Because I see this as getting to the root of the question. And it's not just about, now the holidays are here and now I'm going to make it wholesome. I'm going to just create this amazing holiday. I think, this is the thinking of the word wholesome is something that we have to bring into our everyday life. And so before I begin to explore the idea of a more wholesome holiday, or I also like to use the word holistic, holiday season, I'd like to speak a little bit about creating a more holistic or wholesome lifestyle and where we can start. So just setting up that foundation for then more of what I'll talk about as the talk moves along. And so, because thinking of this more wholesome, holistic everyday life, we really have to work on that, I believe, so that by the time the holiday season comes along, or any particular time of the year where we're really celebrating a festival or a birthday, if life is fragmented, then we only place added stress on ourselves and on our family. And so this is, one of the main reasons why working on this more wholesome way of living every day, and just starting where we are, we can just start where we are and create and take those steps that, that we are looking at, with intention. And because I love to know about and read about, the root meanings of words. And like I said, I might be interchanging wholesome with holistic. I mean, basically it means the same. I looked up the word, and a holistic approach means to provide support that looks at the whole person. And in this definition that I found in the dictionary, it says the 5 aspects of holistic development are physical, intellectual, social, emotional, and spiritual development. And what I would like to add to that is also creative and sensory. So what I'm showing you next on this slide, you can find on my website. It's something that I created some time ago. I think it was a year, maybe even 2 years ago. And these are self-care printables. Like I said, you can find them on my website. So I'm just showing 3 of them here: the physical self-care, emotional self-care, and creative self-care. So when thinking of the word wholesome, and when thinking of how we're going to bring that into this holiday or any holiday season, we really have to think about how we're caring for the whole self, not just our whole self, but that of our child's too. And this is where this led me then to create ways that we can care for the different parts of ourself, and also, our child can start there. So I'm not going to spend time on describing each one of them, but like I said, they're pretty clear, and you can find them on my website. So what does a more wholesome holiday season look like? Well, what it looks like is us focusing on nurturing and nourishing, as I mentioned, all parts of ourselves. So that's where we need to start with making, maybe I shouldn't say making, but with really nurturing, as I've mentioned here, nourishing, those various parts of ourselves so that we can feel whole as much as possible. And that balance is always tricky, we'll get to places where we really feel like, wow, I'm really feeling good and really feeling whole in myself. And then there are other times when we don't. But it's constant work. And, when we do this work, we'll gain awareness of how best to nurture a more wholesome lifestyle while, caring for our child, caring for ourselves too, and our home life. And so now I'm going to just touch on, and like I said, I'm just kind of building up this foundation, and we'll be moving in more in depth into the talk. So thinking of wholesome, wholeness and fragmentation, the opposite of wholeness. And so to create wholeness, we'll need to take a closer look at what fragments our days and how we can bring that back to wholeness. So as I mentioned, and I'll just probably repeat this again and again, it is very difficult to create a wholesome holiday season if our days are fragmented. And so, we need to begin to look at those parts of our days where things are just not flowing smoothly. Maybe we're doing too much. Maybe we are trying to pack too much into the day. Maybe we find ourselves rushing around, and we can begin to just see, like, where's my day? Where are our days fragmented? And often, if we've got young children, they will definitely show us where those points in the day, the days where it's fragmented. And so when there's wholeness, there's spaciousness. And when there's spaciousness, there are possibilities for us to mindfully and thoughtfully create and invite into our lives that which keeps it more balanced, that which helps it to be more whole and less fragmented. And so to then take the next step into how to really work on creating a more wholesome lifestyle, I do believe that it has roots in our daily habits. And so, yes, those roots are within our habits, how we move, our speech, our gestures, how we do things. Are we mindful? Or do we find ourselves reacting and then doing something? Or do we find ourselves kind of responding to a need? Do we take time to observe ourselves? Do we take time to observe our children? So the habits that we are intentionally carrying, with consciousness, well, whether we're doing it with consciousness, actually, I should say, or not, those habits are going to be there. But when we do it consciously, then we're really being more mindful about our days. And that will help us as parents, especially of young children or any child of any age, to create more of that wholesome quality that we want to bring into our lives when we're giving that mindful attention. And so, yes, when we do that with mindfulness, we begin to notice those qualities about ourselves that we may want to strengthen, develop, or let go of. And then it also gives us the opportunity to see what habits that we're passing along to, our children. And so just a quick thing about embracing spaciousness, because I really want to move on to other parts here in the talk. And here's a quote by Katrina Kennison that I read many, many years ago when I purchased her book, The Gift of an Ordinary Day. And she says, "Only by slowing down do we make time for one another. Only by stopping long enough to observe our surroundings can we bring shape and meaning into our lives." And this, to me, is a huge aspect of wholesomeness in our lives and bringing wholesomeness to a holiday season, slowing down. It's such the opposite of where we find ourselves during a holiday season. We find ourselves, speeding up. And then we're losing that possibility of more spaciousness to bring things with greater intention. So something to keep in mind, where are the places where we can slow down? Because when we do speed up, then that's, I think, when we find that things begin to become more fragmented, life does. And then we're moving further and further away from the possibility of creating this wholesomeness that we want to this in the holiday season. And then I'd like to talk a little bit about little stresses. So as Kim John Payne, author of Simplicity Parenting, said, what I came to understand was that little stresses collectively drag on the child's ability to be resilient mentally, emotionally, and physically. And these stresses distract from the focus or task of childhood. which is an emerging, developing sense of self. Well, I do believe that the little stresses also affect us and move us away from this wholesome lifestyle that we want to create, especially if we're thinking of a more wholesome holiday season. And when I say, little stresses, these are like little parts of the day. I shouldn't say little, but parts of the day where little stresses are like popping up and happening. And then before we know it, it's become something big, and that our child has a tantrum, a meltdown. They can't follow what our guidance, and we might be thinking like, oh, it's this particular event or that particular event, when it could just also be, yes, it could be that, but it could just also be like these little stresses that are occurring at different times of the day that are keeping us away from this wholesomeness that we want to create. And those little stresses also affect us. They keep us from being in this place where we can create spaciousness, where we can be more calm, where we can really observe. And so it's very important to kind of, again, look at those times of the day where where life is feeling fragmented, because this will lead to stress. And the fragmentation at different times of the day, you can almost look at them as these little stresses that will then build and build and build. So then I want to just also say, you have a choice. And here's another quote by Katrina Kennison. In simplicity, there is freedom. Freedom to do less and enjoy more. And this is a very important part of bringing in, this more wholesome, cultivating, creating a more wholesome lifestyle, is to know that we can simplify, but even more important, we have a choice. I recall like early on in my years in teaching in the preschool, I had created a rhythm, as all teachers do, in the Waldorf preschool, for a rhythm for the children. And I was beginning to really notice how the children's lives were so full that even this rhythm, which really was working with the in-breath and the out-breath, and I'll touch on that a little later for those of you where this might be new hearing this, but I discovered that even with this beautiful, healthy rhythm, that it was still too much for them. And then I woke up one morning and I thought, I have a choice. I have a choice to simplify. I have a choice to meet the children's needs with this particular group. The last group was different. The next group will be different. But with this particular group, I have a choice to simplify. And when I did that, I could see I was really meeting the needs of the children that were in the class. And it's something that I really worked on when my children were young, and I'll talk about that later as a way to address and work through stress. And then there's finding your truth. This is also a big part of cultivating and creating a more wholesome life, which of course then when you do that, you're inviting in wholesomeness in all areas of your life and what you do, including celebrating the holidays, which is what we're here to talk about. So I would say in finding your truth, give yourself permission to do less, to simplify life, and to release feelings of being bound to doing things any particular way. And I believe that this is what frees us to discover what will lead us to a more wholesome life. And again, to celebrating holidays in a more wholesome way. And so I'll just share a little story here. So in finding my truth, like when I'll talk about Christmas in particular, because that was something that I I worked on with, with my children in terms of, I should say with myself really, in finding my truth within that. So growing up in Nigeria, we celebrated Christmas in a typical way, but it was somewhat different being in a tropical climate, and then coming to the US and celebrating Christmas more as as it's celebrated here by those who celebrate. And then when I met and married my husband, who's from Switzerland, I discovered this whole other way. I found that the way that I'd been celebrating caused a lot of anxiety and stress for me, and felt very rushed. And so in adapting and just kind of bringing in, maybe I shouldn't say adapting, but bringing in that tradition, I found like, wow, this feels so more aligned with what I wanted to do. And it gave me, I gave myself permission to slow down, and that was there. There was more spaciousness, even within that. And so instead of rushing to get everything all done and prepared, within, maybe a few days or a couple days, getting the tree up and this up and that up, I took the whole month of December, just very slowly building and building, little decoration here, a little decoration there. And then at the end, culminating with the tree on the 24th, which was just so beautiful, and then celebrating. I just found that there was so much there in that giving of that living into that in-breath and out-breath, and how it just allowed everyone to just really just live into, and I'll use that word, that wholesomeness of it, and really pay attention and observe. And it was just quite beautiful. So that was one way that I found my truth in celebrating Christmas, and that being one of our big holiday celebrations. But we can apply this to whatever religious or family festival or holiday that we are wanting to have in our families, or we're already doing, because I was already celebrating it in one way. And then I brought in this new way that I learned and was still learning and developing over the years. We can do that, and we can find our truth that way. And so now a couple weeks ago, I did a poll on Instagram, and just asking parents. I was just curious, knowing that this talk was coming up. And so I asked parents, what was overwhelming them about the upcoming holiday season? And these were some of the responses that I received. Finances, keeping routines, depression, overstimulation, money and expectations, traveling and being out of routine, extended family dynamics, new baby days before Christmas, making holiday magic, quality over quantity, getting everything done while working full-time, avoiding anxiety from holiday buzz and fuss, essentially avoiding that frenetic energy. What I found so interesting was that when I looked at each one, the responses as they came in, and I thought, this is all related to stress. And so, of course, yes, it's difficult to enjoy and really just joyfully be there for the holiday season if we are overwhelmed with stress. And then the stress that we feel, we're bringing that, it's just living also in our home environment. And so I thought, oh my goodness, yeah. And then I realized that shortly after that, at some point, as I was going through all of this, it's like, I experienced these too when my children were young. and, all these stresses. But I do want to share with you that, how I worked with them. And I think, we're all doing this. We're all trying to work through, the stress that we feel at the holiday time. And so what I'm going to do now in the next set of slides is I'm going to talk about each one and share with you how I worked with these stresses to reduce that, and hopefully give you some inspiration as to what you can do too. So let's start with finances. And this, I feel like, is really like emotional stress. And so let me take that back to what I shared earlier on with that one screen share about what you can find on my website with the pertaining to self-care. So when we have these stresses, which will come up all the time in life, we can work through that through caring for ourselves. And so I want you to take an opportunity to go to the website and read through that and see, not all stresses will be eliminated, and not necessarily all should be, but how do we work through them and caring for ourselves, caring for our child, meeting their needs. And so there you'll find some suggestions when you're feeling a bit more overwhelmed with the stresses that will pop up. So as I mentioned, my husband is from Switzerland, and I took on or brought into our family life this more Swiss way of celebrating Christmas, and I'll say in particular, all of what I'm going to share here, as I mentioned just a bit ago, I felt all of those stresses, when my children were young. And so when we would prepare gifts when my children were little, whether we were going to be in the US or flying to Switzerland to spend with their Oma and Opa, in the beginning, we were just a very young couple starting our careers. And we had to set a budget. There wasn't just this abundance, of money to spend here and there. But what I found was that, setting a budget for the holiday gifts was a really wonderful and necessary thing to do, so that we wouldn't find ourselves in the new year trying to pay for the past year holiday season. But what I found was just, making homemade gifts. That was amazing. Not just, for the fact that it saved money, way above that. What it did do was that it provided an opportunity for me to really be with my children in a creative, connecting, relationship way. And even more than that, we then also, in making our homemade gifts, and not to say we didn't buy a little bit here and there, but we really focused on, in those years, on the homemade gifts, was that it gave us an opportunity to really think about what that relative, Oma or Opa, aunt or uncle, cousins, what they would really like, and think about who they were. So it also brought us closer connection in our thinking about them, brought us in closer connection with them. And then there we were creating and working with our hands and talking and sharing. I just found that to be so beautiful. It was such a bonus that I hadn't really thought about. And then keeping rhythm and routines. I think at holiday time, we can very easily think of I really want to make this joyful and exciting and fun, for my child or my children. And then we might find ourselves slowly letting go of those rhythm and routines that young children desperately count on. And not only do they count on them, but they need them to feel secure. We need them to keep our days from being fragmented, to keep from feeling overwhelmed, to keep that wholesome wholeness there. Because when we are out of those rhythms and routines, then that's when emotional and physical stress even can begin to develop. And so it's important to determine, within our rhythms and our routines, what are the non-negotiables? Because I'm not saying like holiday time comes along and we can keep to everything, but keeping as much as we can. So what are the non-negotiables? Well, I believe that those are the pillars of the day that we so often talk about in Waldorf education, the meal times, the sleep times, the play times, and just really working with that in-breath and out-breath so that there's time to really, just take life in. And then there are those times that will be exciting, but we want to balance that so we don't find ourselves just at holiday time, which I think we often do, that brings up that anxiety and that overwhelm. Is that we're just breathing in. And then holding ourselves so tightly because we want things to be, so much fun and exciting and joyful, when actually then we are building up that stress within ourselves and that overwhelm. And then traveling and being out of routine. This really is, again, this physical stress that happens, and I want to say even emotional stress and maybe other stresses that, that each one of us will feel in a different way. And so when traveling, this is where rhythm is hugely valuable. That's something that I clung to when my children were young. I kept their rhythm, whether we traveled to Switzerland or somewhere else in the US. And even so much so that when we did travel overseas and had those long flights, after they served food and they turned down the lights on the plane, I had them put their pajamas on, brush their teeth, got their blanket, and it was bedtime. And just even that cue there, getting their pajamas on was amazing, because that was something that they knew. That was something that was familiar. It was their familiar pajamas, nothing new. And so then they could then go to sleep. And it didn't become, a question of what was going to happen next. And so, yes, creating those healthy in and out breaths, during the day, and slowing down supports young children when they're traveling away from home. And so this is something that I really, like I said, kept as their, foundation for the days to keep them from being overwhelmed. And then when traveling again out away from home, I think it's also important to communicate your children's needs, which is something that I did when I traveled with them. It took me a while to learn to just speak my truth there, say what was necessary instead of trying to appease those around me, even though I was staying, in my in-laws' homes. At home, I really felt it was important to communicate. This is what they need. They need to be in bed by 6:30 or 7. This is the time they need their meals. We can do that in a very kind way, but just to communicate for them to be their best selves, this is what they need. And then there's, depression was one of what was shared, and this is just such emotional stress. And so the first thing, I would say it would be to seek help if it's really, really keeping you from being able to just go from day to day. And then to get out in nature as much as possible and take your children with you. Because I think if we're feeling a lot of depression, which from my understanding, what I've read is that, and seen studies, is that holiday time can really bring on a lot of depression for a lot of people. And so going out into nature as much as possible, I think that will really help. It may not be the answer, but it's very helpful. And then to evaluate your daily rhythms and to see, what you can strengthen there, where it's fragmented, as I mentioned earlier, that's an important part, and where you can begin to bring some wholeness into that. That's a very simple answer for depression. And I know that it's a huge, huge topic, and it's something that a lot of people really suffer from. And that's why also seeking help is important with that. And then there's overstimulation. Yeah, and overstimulation, I believe, is an indication that we need to slow down. And if we find ourselves reacting during the holiday time, then that's a sign that we ourselves are probably overstimulated. And if we find our child having tantrums, falling apart, then that's an indication that they're probably overstimulated. And so, young children can only absorb so much until it's just too much. And that can be hard for a parent when this is happening and you're supposed to be in a joyful time of the year, the holiday season. So I would say then, especially if you're traveling, to consider, even at home, a day out and a day at home. Try to find that balance to bring in that wholesome feeling. And then there was like extended family dynamics, Again, this is where I say, we need to speak up. I think that's all, these are all really important parts about, ushering in, it's the topic of our talk tonight, ushering in a more wholesome holiday season. It means that we also need to communicate and speak up and, talk about what our child and family's needs are. And even if we're going nowhere, we're staying at home and doing it with our family and, even with our spouse or partner, I think, it's also important, and I do this with my husband, is to communicate, this is what the children need so that the holiday season can be joyful and we can all, come together in joyful ways. Because this is also what the children will remember. They will remember the feelings attached to the holiday time. They'll forget most of the gifts and what was served on the table, but they won't forget the feeling, how it made them feel. And then there's this making, holiday magic. And again, I believe that the magic comes from within and not outside of ourselves. And it comes from our gratitude for what we already have. And so what we need to, I believe, do here when it comes to making holiday magic and thinking again of that wholesomeness around that is to really consider, and think about how we can carry within us this sense, this feeling of gratitude. And that's something that our children, our young children, or older children will feel from us. And that's where our joy will also come from. We'll be holding that and carrying that, within ourselves. And if we think about it from the perspective of creating this more wholesome holiday season, I think what we can think about, in that perspective is that we're nurturing those parts of ourselves so that we can be in the holiday season in a joyful way. So it comes back to that self-care, that nurturing. And when I say the self-care, I should also add to that, caring for those parts of our children, those parts of us that make us human, that need to be nurtured and nourished. And then quality over quantity. Yeah, that's a big one. So yeah, when we're thinking of, again, this more wholesome way of being in the holiday season, we can get to a place of overwhelm when we're just focusing on quantity over quality. And so when my children were young, and this was, again, a question that came on the Instagram poll. So when my children were young, I, in an effort to really have those gifts, that came into those holiday gifts that came into the home, be something that I felt was more aligned with what I wanted, for them. I made a gift registry or a list with links, to gifts that that could be purchased for them. And so that was really, really helpful, because I think if we allow the focus to be on the quantity over the quality, then again, I think we are moving away from a more wholesome feeling about the wholesome feeling, the wholesomeness that we want to bring in to the holiday season. And that can also, if we're focusing on that too, that can also bring in more of this frenetic feeling, as gifts begin to pile up and pile up and pile up. We need to really kind of think about, what is the experience I want for my child? Do I want them to just open up a few gifts and really be in a place of gratitude for what they are receiving? So again, let's go, comes back to communicating. We need to communicate why it's important that, to us, about what our child receives in terms of quality of gifts over quantity, or in terms of what is more aligning with what we want to do. And then again, we're speaking our truth, and that is important. So all of this it's all connected. It's really all connected to ushering in a more wholesome holiday season. There are all these various parts, all these various aspects that we need to give our attention to. And not as though we don't already have so many areas to give our attention to as parents, we do. But we can take small steps. And I'm not saying, go and tackle everything all at once, because that's not possible. That would be a huge amount of stress. But we can take steps, and small steps, and each year find ourselves making that progress that we want to make, that's important to us. And then getting everything done. Yeah. I think that's something that overwhelms us and causes us stress too during the holiday season. And so, to have this experience, this more wholesome feeling during the holiday, again, we need to really look at what is fragmenting our day. Are we doing too much? Are we trying to achieve too much? And it's important, I think when we think about this, like, we really, are taking away from our joy if we're rushing about and it's frenetic and we're exhausted and we're stressed. So yeah, these, again, like I said, this is all so connected. And then there's money and expectations. Well, you have a choice. You have a choice, as I mentioned. You can choose to not live according to the expectations of others and set what you want for your family. And, knowing like, okay, this is what we can afford. It's a reality. It's concrete. And then knowing, okay, this is what we can do. And then being grateful for that, accepting that. I'm saying this with such ease. I know it's hard. I've been there, but it's one way to kind of look at bringing this more wholesome feeling into the holiday and finding our truth within that too. And then another question that came was like the new baby days before Christmas. This was something that I experienced. It wasn't my second was born just a few days before Christmas. And so it's what we can look at here to really keep from of overwhelm and more of this frenetic feeling of like, oh my goodness, I'm not going to be able to get everything done, because that can really lead us to being quite stressed then. So just to see, what can we prepare earlier? And just recognizing, just being present and available to our children when a new baby comes along. I had my son who was 3 then when my second was born. And I just really focused on simplifying and just being present and getting up and doing what I could do, but just being present. That was the important thing. As I mentioned earlier, toys will be forgotten. The meal will probably be forgotten, but your emotional state will have a rippling effect. They'll remember that. And so this is something that, we can really think about when thinking about, creating this more wholesome holiday season is our emotional state. And then again, that's where the self-care comes in. How can we care for ourselves? We especially need to really care for ourselves during the holiday season because that energy is all around us. Yeah. And so this other, avoiding the anxiety, avoiding the frenetic energy, what we can do to make it more festive and less frenetic, again, is to choose where we will go and to avoid those places that we know will cause us anxiety or cause our child anxiety. Because as I mentioned earlier, we don't have to do everything and we can choose and we can simplify. And so, yes, staying on focused, on healthy rhythms and routines that you've already established, that makes a big impact. And then there's creating beauty. This is, I think, the last part of this part of the topic was creating beauty and bringing beauty in. And so here's a quote by Pearl S. Buck that I have kept and just admired and loved to look at, where I've written it down over the years. And she says, if somebody were to ask me what is most important in the life of a child, I would say it is beauty. Children long for beauty, but they cannot always create it or find it by themselves. So we must help them to discover the beauty in nature. And when we show children what is beautiful, they will search for it. I just really love that because here she's really connecting beauty to nature. Like that's a starting place. Help them to discover the beauty in nature. And I think that is so important. And it's also just so nurturing and nourishing for the young child and for us too. And so we can go out and we can gather things in nature, and that can be part of the beauty, a big part of the beauty that we're bringing into our homes. And then just creating beauty spots in the home. And this doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go and purchase things, but you can see what you have in your home. Maybe your child's collected a few, stones on a walk, or maybe you have a few crystals in your home, or you have a little candle that you can light. I think it's just great value in creating little places of beauty. And that was something that I often, and still do, in fact, in my home, so that when you look and turn here or there, it doesn't have to be everywhere, that there are those places of beauty. And so in thinking of the holiday season, where are those places where you can, create little places of beauty. A couple weeks ago, with my family, I melted beeswax that I had and from years ago, and we collected little branches of evergreen branches and some leaves and some acorns, and dipped them into the beeswax, and then made this like garland, which is hanging over the kitchen table where we mostly eat. And so, yes, that was intentional to create this place of beauty. And then as we get ready for the holiday season, there'll be other little places where that will come up. I don't ever attempt to do it all at once. Like I said, I take the whole month of December and then just creating a little bit here, creating a little bit there, and going out into nature. And that's a way to bring beauty into the home at the holiday time. And like I said, not to push yourself, not to rush. Take your time, have your children help you, and it'll just bring so much joy. And that's what will be memorable to them, right down on a cellular level. That will be so valuable for them as they grow, and they'll remember. They will remember those times. And so I believe that brings me to the end here of the talk. But I do want to say you can stay in touch and find me on Instagram at @we_nurture. And as was mentioned earlier, by email. You can, by my website, wenurturecollective.com, or you can email me at connect@wenurturecollective.com. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Chinilu.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to invite all participants to join us by putting questions in the chat. Include where you're from if you would like. And we have some more time together.
Mm-hmm.
So thorough, not many questions. I love it. I'll go first. I have one. I know you had mentioned really that spaciousness was so important, and then balancing expectations that can come in from family at this time. Have you found any helpful phrases or ways to carry your expectations for your family out to the external community so that they're not feeling slighted? I think that comes up a lot.
That the extended family isn't feeling slighted.
Extended family or friends, or just leaving yourself room to say no to all of the invitations that tend to come in, but a generous way to say that.
That's a good question. Yes. I have always kind of referred to what my child's needs might be, and not to like put it upon my child, but that was always like my starting place, was to see was to really acknowledge and what their needs were at that particular time. And I have to think about that one. I can't say that I've had a particular kind of general phrase. I've kind of addressed it when it did come up, with individual, like whether it was family or friends.
Yeah, I mean, that's helpful in itself, of addressing the child's needs and really telling them exactly why we can't do it for,
for whatever
past his bedtime, or it's this, anything like that. So.
Exactly. Because I think, like for me, that was me then really speaking my truth in terms of what I could do or could not do based on my child's needs. Because for me, the most important part was to really be there. I needed to be the voice for my children and not expect them to go through an experience that I knew was going to be too much for them. So I needed to be their advocate. I needed to be their voice. And then I think, when we do speak our truth about our child's needs, especially around, any time really, it's not just the holiday time, then I think people hear that and they feel the truth in that. And so that's what I found to be most helpful.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Oh, I apologize. It looks like something with the chat was going on. I'm so sorry, everyone. We're like, where are your questions? I think we have fixed that glitch. You should be able to ask them now, and we might be able to buffer a little extra time if it helps.
I see Q&A and I see 5 there. Do you see that?
I see some wonderful questions in the Q&A. So one of them is, how can I include my children in preparing for the holidays? So I guess child-friendly activities that the children can help with.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, that's something that I did with my children, during the holiday time. So one of the things that they would do was we would make cookies together, which I know, lots of parents probably do. So we would bake cookies for relatives, and, even for our own family, and buy tins, like get some tins and put them in the tins. And sometimes, we would ship them or take them if we were going. My children would make cards. So I would get not really super thick paper, but, like construction paper, card-like paper, and then have them draw on that, and we would make our own cards. In fact, I think we made cards for years that there was at one point, I think my son was approaching 4 or so, and we went to the store and he said, "Oh, mommy, they sell cards. We don't have to make them anymore." But he made them for years, and we did that. We make wrapping paper. You can get brown paper, and then I would cut potatoes in half, like a white potato, and then just do a little cutout of like a star or Christmas tree, and then watercolor paper or tempera paper, paint or tempera paint, and then make stamps, and they could stamp that, And so I just thought, as much as what we could use at home was very helpful. There were lots of different ways of having them participate. We would take yarn and make them into ribbons. My son loved to finger knit. We'd use that for bows and ribbons. And so there are lots of different crafts, but I didn't do a ton with them, but basically focused on wrapping paper, cards, and ribbons, because I didn't want to overwhelm them with too much. And then of course, baking cookies and decorating them. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to throw in that I recently discovered with my students was making flower arrangements with evergreens.
Yeah.
My mom used to love making flower arrangements, and just to be able to sit with a pile of evergreens or whatever's left in the garden, like herbs,
yes,
or grasses, and just let them cut the bottoms to the right shape or length to fit in whatever container you have. And it really is a wonderful thing then that they need to change, every so often. And it's this ongoing way to beautify that they can then be outside collecting to bring in.
Exactly. Yes. And 1 year in the preschool, or actually more than 1 year, I brought in nuts, like one can buy these assortments of nuts nowadays in the grocery store. And then I, at home by myself, drilled holes through the nuts. And then the children made these garlands, and they collected pine cones outside, and we added different little pieces of sticks and things. And so they made these garlands out of nuts and pine cones. And so those are like simple crafts that one can do with children. And yeah.
Wonderful. How do you suggest balancing the needs of different children? One craving more stimulation than the other, and just balancing that out in your household.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, that's a very good question. And that can be very tricky when you see one needing more stimulation and another, needing more of the quiet. And I suppose that's not unusual. It's to have, to see that in a family, because we're all such different personalities. And I think the one place, if this is possible for the parent asking the question, to be outside more, because outside will really meet the needs of both of the children. And with the one child that might need less stimulation, maybe then what can happen is that when you are outdoors, then maybe there's a quiet activity that they might want to do, or they often, children when are outside, they'll discover what it is that they need, their bodies. Maybe that child might be one collecting things to gather, or maybe the one who needs that stimulation. Maybe they're running about and moving their bodies, in ways that are needed, or finding things that they need. I think when we are in the home, and then you have a child that needs more stimulation, it can bring a bit of frustration to the parent, because then, they're seeing like, oh, this child needs to get out. So if that's the case, then but go out into nature, and then nature is just able to really remedy both, like the child needing more stimulation and the child needing more, maybe more quiet. Yeah.
Wonderful. From Andrea, she was asking for a simplistic, wholesome Advent countdown idea to do with a
Yes.
1.5 and 4-year-old. So they're trying to find a new
Uh-huh.
tradition for their family that they can
Yes.
do after dinner, but that's mellow and not building excitement before bedtime.
An Advent tradition. Yes. So I'll share one. I have more than one, but I'll share one. And that is when I worked in the preschool, and I also did it at home. I got gold paper. It was kind of thick, maybe, I don't want to say construction, but it was like a thickish kind of gold paper. And then I cut stars out of them. So I made like a template and cut stars. And then for each, and then hung it on a string. So I used a needle instead of a hole punch, so the hole wouldn't be so present, and hung them all on strings. And then each night, then one of my children, or in the preschool, one of the children there got to select a star, out of the bag, and then I would tape it up on the ceiling above the table where we ate. And so then they were just so excited, because each day then there was a new golden star hanging from the ceiling. And then by the time, so many of the stars, by the time we get to the 24th and so many stars are there, it was like magic, really like magic. And it doesn't have to go over the table, but that's where I placed it. It could go, somewhere else also. Yeah. So that's one idea that I found just was pure magic. We can just be so simple. We can do things so simply for the children. I think sometimes we feel like we have to do so much, but we can keep it simple.
In the spirit of keeping things mellow at some times of the day and coming way out at other times for celebration, can you speak a little bit more to the rhythm of breathing in and out for the families listening?
Yes. So this breathing in and out, just like we breathe, we're breathing in, we're breathing out. And that is a way that, in Waldorf education, we work with rhythm in the classrooms, especially in the early childhood classrooms for the young children. And it's something that I brought into my home when my children were young, just really giving great attention to this rhythm. So let's think about it in this way, with this breathing in and this breathing out. So this breathing in would be these more times of quiet, and then the breathing out where there's more activity, more happening. Maybe it's like the breathing in, your child's gotten up in the morning and they're sitting down at the table and having breakfast. And then this breathing out, now they are heading out with you for a walk or an activity. And then you're coming back home again and they're sitting down and having snack. And it's more of this attention to the meal and the eating, and this breathing in, more time of quiet. And then maybe they're up again and it's running around time and playing, going out in the backyard, and then breathing out. So if we think about it, in that way, what it does is it actually just helps to bring more of this balance into the home life. It helps to really keep a child, if I could say this, more regulated than dysregulated, because then we are really giving attention as to the flow of the day and how that feels to them internally. And so, yes, we can bring this breathing in and breathing out into the rhythm. But another aspect of that is that we also need to make sure that we're giving it enough time. Because if it's like breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out, we need to just really see, if you think about the breakfast, how much time for that outside or free play, how much time for that. So we're not moving along too quickly. So that's an important aspect too. So there are two aspects to that. And yeah, and we really do need to give attention to not rushing with that, but also seeing what our child's needs, the family's needs, and in some cases, with different children who have the different needs, we have to see like, well, where can that happen? Also, like as I mentioned, about the mom who asked, or the parent who asked about a child who needs more stimulation and another one who doesn't, being outside. So yeah.
I know many children get feeling hectic during transitions. So that's another place where we teachers this time of year look to reduce
Yes.
and calm transitions.
Yeah. Slow things down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about in terms of keeping things slow for older children and teens? Do you have any suggestions?
Well, those suggestions would have to come out of my own experience as a parent, since my experience as a teacher was with young children in those early childhood years. So the question was slowing things down, you mentioned, for teens. Yes. So when my children were young teenagers, we just moved to Pennsylvania. Well, my two older ones, the way that I slowed things down was let's say the way that I chose to live in rhythm with the seasons and connecting with the seasons was to really, if we look at the seasons and what's the season that we're in and what's happening in nature, maybe I should put it that way. If we look at what's happening in nature around us, we can get really good tips, And so for example, when fall was coming to an end and it was approaching winter, there were certain activities, work activities that my children, were doing. And I said, we're going to cut back, because what we need to do now is really care more we need to really give a lot of care to ourselves in this winter season. And so that means more rest. And so to slow things down, I looked to see, I'd sit and talk with them to see like, what can we let go of now? Not to say it can't come back in the spring, it will, but what can we let go of now? Because this is a season where we need to come in more and reserve our energy, take care of ourselves so we can be less sick, not make ourselves sick by living as though it's summertime and we're just out and going. And so I think when you have teens, as I did, when they were a few years ago, I, again, like I mentioned, sit down and talk with them in a respectful way and hear what they had to say. And then also say, this is something that I think is really important. And I always found that they agreed, because I think if we approach it with respect, as opposed to bringing down the hammer, then they'll they'll recognize. And so that's the advice I can give, from my own experience. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to add one little ritual that came up in my family around this time of year was moon watching, because the days get darker so much earlier.
Yeah.
That with young children, you can actually get them out there to see the moon. So that could be a calming ritual that you might bring to your family. And you are such a magic maker, Chinilo. Just hearing you talk, I feel like we're all going to be coming into this wonderful season with feeling that energy. So thank you for being with us tonight. Yes. I'm sorry I didn't get to all the questions, but I feel like you touched on things surrounding all the questions. Right. And thank you, Kathy, for your wonderful signing, and Scotty for putting this together. And from the Waldorf School of Baltimore, we wish everyone a wonderful holiday season filled with peace and calm. So enjoy your families. Don't stress. And have a wonderful evening.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you again.
Goodbye, everybody.